Welcome to our 2026 Change Exchange podcast lineup for inquiring change practitioners, future-focused leaders making change decisions, and those on the front line of change dedicated to making change happen in tough and complex worlds. I'm Nick Kemp, founder and chief change consultant at OD Change Consulting, where we specialise in helping businesses ride the wave of dynamic change in a complex world. Our approach is radical, different, and always supportive, developing new perspectives on old problems and bringing attention to the things that are hidden in plain sight. My Change Exchange partner, Kimberly Shaw, is founder and principal consultant at Changeify in Toronto. Changeify specialises in positive change management and organisational transformation for global clients. With people at the centre of what they do, they have a mission to create lasting change that sticks. We're excited today to be joined by Michael Thorley, owner of Transcend Consultancy, an international niche consultancy headquartered in the UK. Michael enables leaders to develop the skills needed to achieve complex and lasting change. He is a complex change consultant, systemic facilitator and mindful coach. He is also a coach supervisor, psychotherapist, and on top of all of this, he's a qualified accountant and an amateur endurance athlete. Don't know how he finds the time. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Kimberly, you and I have been talking for a while about bringing Michael into our podcast agenda. Perhaps you can elaborate a bit more on the conversation we would like to explore today.
You bet. And there's so much as part of our ongoing conversation, Nick, that we've been having. And I think today is special for us with Michael, because we're going to explore what change looks like when it's experienced by individuals and systems. As we often debate, change is often relegated to a process, to task mastery, a series of activities. And we are firmly in the belief, which we're hoping to explore today, that people, as you had mentioned earlier, Nick, are at the center of what change is. So today, what we're exploring is what is the relationship? What is the situationship, if you will, between people and systems when they are confronted by and ideally engaged with change? So one of the big questions I might kick ourselves off with today is change safe and should it be?
Great question. Michael, would you like to kick off on that one?
Yes, I notice I'm having a visceral reaction to the question already. I think it's good to say I'm a bit like Kimberly and Nick. I'm a bit kind of left field. And I do question language which becomes overused. And one of them is let's make change safe or psychological safety. If something is too safe, then how does that support change? Because surely as individuals, we want to, as Erica Young would say, feel the fear and do it anyway. So it's about making it safe enough such that we feel, if I'm slightly candid, a bit on the edge of our pants, on the edge of our seat, but we are supported by what we do through having a clear business rationale and clear communication with each other in which we can be open-minded, open-hearted, and focused on the future. So how about that for a start, Kimberly?
It's a fantastic start. And I love so much in what you're saying already. I really love that reference to the idea of being on the edge, if you will, because I think it would be, and I'm presuming we can explore this too, that edge is really where great ideas, great innovations, great opportunities, tend to emerge as well in organizations. And I love as well, Michael, your reference to adequate support in being at the edge. And I instantly think of, what does that look like? What does that mean when it comes to agreeing that people should be on the edge, if you will, for great things to happen, to be compelled through change. But then what does that support necessarily look like?
Yeah, I was interested in the idea of being on the edge. I remember an old phrase that, you need to be on the bleeding edge of change. That's where you need to focus on that as an issue. And I think that for me, part of it is about, if you're going to ask people to be on the edge, then actually making it safe for them to be on the edge is a critical thing, but also making it unsafe not to be on the edge. There has to be a consequence to people's choice to not go there as well. And provided that consequence is visible, I think we're doing a good job. But so often, particularly to your point, Kimberly, when you started off, people see change as a process, not as a choice, and that I think is an interesting area to explore.
I wonder if in what you're saying, Nick, as we're pointing to the consequences, right, of not being safe, or the benefits, should we say, in being unsafe, perhaps that's a better way to put it. That seems to suggest that there is an incredible responsibility, if you will, or as you said, Michael, a case, for the change that's understood at the outset, to be able to clearly communicate those consequences, and to communicate that support, right, that's available in pursuing, right, these activities. I'm curious, as to how we build those relationships, if you will, almost as conditions of excellent change or change excellence.
I would add to that. So I'm just noticing I'm picking up this on the whole idea of change communications, which is another thing that kind of gets me a bit. So I understand absolutely why people are trying to do what they're trying to do, but it's how they do it. So we've been talking a bit about the edge, and let's imagine there is a business, the business change is articulated as X. Every single individual will experience their own edge in that. So our edge is not the same. So being able to talk with each other about, actually, the edge for me is my role is on the line, is not the same as your edge, as you've got to learn a new IT system or do something else. So being very clear about the price and the prize of being at the edge or on the edge is really important. And I think that's what change communications, if I'm slightly cynical, I think it sometimes tries to make it easy and kind of avoids a bit, actually, this is going to be difficult. And dare I say, some people will have to pay a price. And that is unfortunate. But we are talking about organizational change, where whether we like it or not, we are employed and paid by an organization, and primary loyalty goes to the business and the organization. And I notice I feel a bit sad saying it, but it is also true. And where there's truth, there can be an open heart, and then can then be an honest conversation. I don't know what you guys feel about that.
Well, I'm really interested in the concept of there has to be a price to pay, and I absolutely agree with you. I think it's absolutely true in change. And when we talk and we communicate around change, we sometimes talk about the burning platform for the business, but we don't talk about the price that needs to be paid in the way that you've just described it, Michael, with the individual. And I think as one of the things which I'm very aware of is that people will actually be quite happy to pay the price if they understand the purpose. And this is the area where I think we sometimes miss it, despite all the protestations and all the things that have been talked about purpose in organisations and change. We still, I think, often in organisations talk about process, and we talk about the burning platform, and we don't talk about where we sit into the wider system and why that's important. And I'm sure we've all got masses of examples of really selfless things that people do in the service of something which they see to be important. And I'm curious about why, certainly in my experience, more time isn't spent on that and less time spent on talking about process.
I agree with that, Nick. I think there's something in what's been said to this point. When we talk about our roles, if you will, on the edge, and I think that is incredibly important. And then this mandate, if you will, right? This very clarified change mandate that's organizationally driven, and frankly, what we're suggesting is really the truth behind the change. I think the part that I'm instantly triggered by, since we're all sharing triggers here, is then the the prevention, if you will, from change being something that happens to people because of that mandate, as opposed to something with people. So to me, there's real work then, I would think, in motivating people, in activating people, even in the face of truth, if you will, as organizationally driven, to not only engage and support the change, and maybe still be wildly resistant to it, which Nick, you and I've talked about many times. But I'm wondering also if we're in generally in change, missing the opportunities where people have a say and a role in an activity to be able to co-create still and collaborate and define new value and new opportunity through the change by reframing our experience in it.
I would fully support what you're saying, Kimberly, and I think it takes a lot of bravery for people in the hierarchy, as well as those impacted directly by the change, to discuss all of those things. And to be honest about co-creation and co-consultation isn't about egalitarianism or equality. It means just hearing. I think Nick uses the phrase in his work, hearing all the voices, in order that when we speak together, we are together. So a bit like the North American tribes and other ethnic groups who sit in circles, that everybody's voice is equal, but their point of view isn't necessarily given a privilege above anybody else. And it's being able to do that in a way which is full of absolute respect. And I think that is something people find difficult. So I can be respectful for you, to you, with you, even when I have bad news for myself or for others.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yes, I love the idea, the concept of sitting in a circle and everyone's voice being heard, because at that point, the choice is very much explicit to the individual who's hearing the voice as to what it is they choose to do. But it does make it very much more of a conscious decision that they've heard this voice, they can now make the choice. The problem I've seen in many organisations is that they have large meetings, they have town halls, they have customer days, they listen to lots of stuff but don't really hear any of it. And that ability, I think, to have those big conversations, to get underneath the skin of what people are saying, to be more curious and inquiring as to why they're saying it and what that actually means for the system as a whole, is a really important point. And I'm really quite interested as change agents, what is it that you do to create that sense of openness and space for the conversation to be different to the one that they've had before? So what do you see the role as a change agent being?
I don't know Kimberly very well, but I've heard her in brief conversations we've had about talking about the notion of belonging and unbelonging, for example. So change agent, again, it can mean so many different things in many organizations. To be frank, I don't really care what it's called, so long as the people who are actively involved make their own meaning from it. But for me, a change agent is somebody who helps build awareness and build capability of, and I come from an individualistic point of view, an individual's understanding of how they work in an organizational or group setting. So these things I know that Kimberly you're interested in. So for example, belonging. So if we come from a family, so I'm one of 5 kids, I'm bored of my parents, so I automatically have a right to belong. I'm the 3rd child, so, I struggle a bit to find my place now and again, but I'm sure I have a place. When I'm in an organization, my place to belong and my understanding is based on essentially my performance and my competence and my capability of what I give. So as a change agent, if I don't understand my own stuff, to use that technical word that's going on, how can I help other people when they notice, and often these things are felt in the body somatically and they're unconscious, they just feel something isn't quite right. So I see it as my job to help people give sense and meaning to this for themselves. And then again, in the organizational context of what it is we are here trying to do for and on behalf of the organization.
I like that notion, and I appreciate you threading in, this sort of home, if you will, of belonging and what it means individually, and it ties in a lot to agency as well. We are agents, but we're also creating or supporting agency. And something that we tapped on before in prior conversation in relationship to this discussion about belonging is that identity becomes so critical in defining, even stripping it back a little bit further when we speak of, individualism. And I find that is rich work in change activation, in change networking, and change, engagement is really getting to a level understanding as to how individuals and teams at the level of identity, and that translates into beliefs as well, as to their own agency and their belonging within the larger organization, which is systemic as well. I think that's really potent as well when we look at sort of the current stages, because I think it's very pluralistic, internally in organizations and external, right? As to what conditions individuals are coming into organizations, if you will, or cross systems in which we are positively or negatively participating, depending upon what's happening.
Yeah, you've just voiced exactly what I was going to say about the whole thing, that there is an organisation and there is a system. And I think that one of the things which I find fascinating is how many in organisations feel that the system doesn't go further than their own part of the organisation, not even the organisation as a whole. And then you've got the whole question about helping people understand purpose and meaning within a wider frame than the one that they're used to talking about. And identity is quite often quite narrowly defined in organisations, and to help people understand their identity within the system is a very different proposition from seeing their identity as part of one large organisation. And I think that's been an area where I've had some really rich conversations.
I'm curious as to what good looks like then, or how we define. I'm wondering, if part of our discussion is, if we assume and we're aligned in these things, then what should we be seeing?
This is why I really enjoy my professional training, if you like, from the individual psychotherapeutic to the systemic. Because I think ultimately, yes, I believe in the power of the individual, but we do not exist alone in any kind of vacuum in the present, the past, or the future. We are one of something. And I use the word of rather than even in something. So there's a sense that it's moving. And on my LinkedIn profile, I think I write something like, my one-liner is, change happens by looking thoughtfully at the present, because I believe that is absolutely true. So to that question, Kimberly, when I had a proper job and was a line manager, and I worked alongside Nick as well in some consultancies, whenever I was working with individuals, I was interested in their ability or otherwise to articulate what was going on for them in the choices they were making for and on behalf of the client. And if they were unable to articulate it, that was often a capability gap. So I and Nick, he and I did some wonderful work in the public sector, helping some public sector people gain a different kind of awareness and language just by, we did a whole thing, Nick, I don't remember, in Glasgow, went into a room and set up PlayStations for people to, not as in the gaming PlayStation, but like paper and card and plasticine and all this kind of stuff. So what change looks like is people doing something different and can consciously articulate it. It's not as if, I trod on a pin or something. And to make a choice. So back to your point earlier, Kimberly, about agency. I think it is about people choosing consciously what to do. And I don't mind if it fits the organisation or not, as long as it's their choice, because they are adults and they can recognise the consequence of that choice in relationship with where the organisation's going. So for me, it's really quite hard. Yeah, it is. It's hard-nosed. It's evidence-based. What is this person thinking, doing, being, with whom, now, then, and in the future? And does it fit, for want of a better word?
I love that, because in behind what you're suggesting, which comes back to some of our earlier, discussion, is this idea that it's active, it's agent, right? There's volition. There's a level of adulting, which I'm a firm believer in. I think there's and I'll say this as a sidebar, an interesting infantilism sometimes in our change terminology, relative to supporting and reinforcing and engaging those more difficult conversations to get to better outcomes, recognizing that there are gaps, recognizing that there are imperfections, recognizing that there are some mandates and must-dos, right, in the work that we do. But regardless, and I think that's what you're promoting here, Michael, and through the good work that you've done with Nick, is that it is an active, it's a set of activities, if you will, whereby we're eliciting and soliciting that level of awareness and engagement to still arrive, right, at some level, I would presume, of shared successes, whether we love them or not, whether we're complicit in them or not, whether we're part of the gap or part of the fulfillment. It doesn't matter in my mind. It really is about really what we co-create, or I love your mention earlier of co-consult, to that which needs to be done to satisfy, right, these outcomes that we're striving for. I love that.
Something I'm reminded of, which I'm just checking in with myself, I hold it to be absolutely true, is that we are always in relationship. So even when we three separate after this podcast, we are in some way still in relationship. The question is, what is the nature of that relationship? And does that relationship need to change or alter to achieve something else? So I'm sure when we're all in our change work and consultancy, and when I'm a psychotherapist, I'm always asking myself, what is the nature of the relational dynamic that is needed in order to effect the change that is being requested? So I used to work for a very huge top 4 management consultancy, which I won't name, but I used to tear my hair out when we were going to have yet another blue, green, red training to make sure everybody did this, that, and something else. So vast expense, sheep dipping everybody. And I would say, well, why are we spending so much money on building that particular skill when actually it isn't needed? We need to treat people the same. Well, actually, you don't. When we look at our personal relationships, we do not invest the same in every single personal relationship, because we each have only so much emotion in our bank account, for want of a better word. And being able to recognize what the dynamic is in the organization is important. So Nick or Kimberly, I can't remember which of you were mentioning, but if we think systemically, and we think of the 4 orders of time, place, belonging, and exchange in an organizational system, as an individual, you really need to have your wits about you to understand how those play out in the relational dynamics. And if I put my accounting hat on, I would say that sometimes I do a calculation in my head about emotionally, what am I prepared to give for this relationship dynamic in order to achieve X, Y, and Z? And It might sound a bit analytical, but I find it very useful. It helps me really check in with what I'm doing, how am I doing it, and so on.
I like this notion that there's an incredible benefit in understanding all of our currencies, right? Within change and transformation, and being able to articulate, which I find in the course of change engagement is a relief, to some parties and organizations, that they have more or less, if you will, skin in the game, even more or less investment, more or less requirements, given the clarity, I think, is what we're talking about, or at least part of the work that we do ideally in understanding specifically the role they do play ideally within a change or transformation, or, in an organizational improvement. And also, I think through that circle that you referred to earlier, Michael, the opportunity to even have discourse and discussion around that, right? To be able to come to the table, if you will, with some of these, we'll call them assumptions, but albeit informed and working assumptions, to help clarify, if you will, the roles and relationships that individually and as a group we have to a specific change, and I would argue set of changes often these days within organizations. I think that does pay really good. It is good diligence, if you will, around some of the complexity management that we're offering as part of the work that we can and should be doing.
Yes, that's really interesting. I've really enjoyed listening to both of you in this particular part, in particular, because Michael, you talked about relational in investment, and Kimberly, you talked about currency. The word that was coming into mind as I listened to both of you is there something here about contract? Is there something here about what it is it's okay to say and what it's not okay to say, and what you're prepared to put in and what you're not prepared to put in, and what you contract that relationship to be, which you can, if you want, make very explicit. And certainly in my role as a change practitioner, as you say, Kimberly, with us sitting outside the organisation, having that contract as to what you require and what they require of you, and being clear about that up front is often, I think, a real stumbling block to change, because no one ever is explicit about it, and it just becomes, you've said something, I'm not quite sure what it is, but you said something which is outside the contract which you were supposed to have here. You cannot say that here. And to make those things explicit as part of our practice, I found really helpful.
That reminds me a bit of so my sense is that we're all essentially emergent change practitioners. So we're very clear about what the intended direction of travel is, but we are in the emergent space. So in the relational dynamic, when there's and I love the word contract, and I recognize I have quite a sophisticated interpretation of it, whereas some of our clients may not. So just checking with clients what they mean by that. For me, a contract is a dynamic relational thing which helps keep us courageous to do the right thing when we discover what is new to us. So I find it bizarre that, you can have this massive program of whatever it is with a change work stream, and the change work stream has all these sacrosanct, milestones which you can never change. But our job is to say, oh, isn't it interesting how whenever we come up to a milestone, there seems to be a repeating pattern that we don't meet them. Let's not be critical of that, but celebrate the fact that we never achieve it, because there's learning in there. So how are we going to now have a conversation to get the learning, which is everybody has done their best, and somehow, for some reason, this isn't right, inverted commas, for the organization. So I think it becomes really interesting.
That idea, because I think what it comes back to is our own boldness and bravery, right, that we're speaking about as facilitators, right, as purveyors, if I dare say it, right, of change. I think instantly in your comments there, Michael, of the work that we've done in practice to revisit those assumptions that we make, those milestone assumptions, right, these benchmarks, which are very, very project driven, right, very initiative based, not necessarily consistent or commensurate with the people experience, the human experience of what it means to actually not only understand, align, motivate, and engage that which is proposed as change, but to really be to create the space to be responsive and have influence, right, in return on these structures that we insist upon, knowing to a certain degree, there's a reality around them, but they're never really that structural or that good or that strong until we actually have these very conversations. And I think that is a call to action, if you will, to practitioners, to really step up and step into these conversations for the very wonderful reasons that you, Michael, and Nick, you've been pointing to in our conversation.
I can remember writing hugely complex business cases in anticipation of change. And very rarely does a business ever do a post-change business case check. Remember Nick and I, when he and I worked for this organisation, he and I were being rigorous, I would say, in trying to chase a business case review. And it comes a bit back to what is the story that's waiting to be told once you've done the change. And I think it takes a huge amount of courage to actually say, no, we did say we would try and do this. Yes, we've got interim milestones, but when you add them all up, we need to look at, okay, how come we did really well in this and not so well in that? And that comes a bit back to, when we circle back to our conversation about what's the relational dynamic, what's safe, what does a change agent do? I think change agency is about being very courageous and very honest, and dare I use the word love, i.e. being kind, in order to articulate what is needed now for the best outcome that is possible now. And I think if we lose sight of being kind, being courageous, building capability, and being articulate with our intention and tracking the results, I think we lose something in that.
What is the one thing which you would advise or ask people to consider in their management of change?
So mine would be, and this is evocative, Nick, of a conversation we had earlier with another one of our guests, and it stuck with me. And I think, Michael, you've helped really elucidate, so much of this for me is this notion of fierce care in change and transformation. This idea of some level of us as practitioners coming to the table with some level force, but in absolute support, for the care of not only individuals and team, but fundamentally also organizations and their outcomes.
Yes, very good point. And thank you for that, Kimberly. For me, I think there's something about the idea of disruption as being a critical point in any change process, which people get frightened of. And to your point about care, I guess the other side of the coin for me is helping people have the courage to be disruptive in their view of how things are today and what they might be tomorrow and their place in that. So for me, helping them cope with disruption is a critical point. Michael.
I can't build on that because when I sit here and I think of all my clients, individually, these sports organizations I'm working with at the moment, I know that I have an edge. I have no doubt about it. And I have worked a lot over 25 years to find a way where the edge is softer. And it is about being kind with courage, with a very clear intentionality behind it. So unless there is intention with attention, I think we can miss so much. So I would say it's intention with attention, which is the purpose, it almost summarizes Gestalt psychotherapy. You know, being present in the moment, fully attending to an intention.